I just can't. Yeah, so there's that. So we could talk about that it's like, okay, corporations are evil and there isn't any higher purpose you can serve as a woman than to serve one. It's like, okay, I'm not exactly sure what to make of that.
Now watch.
Then I want to tell you a weird little story too. I was looking at the Brothers Grimm Snow White version recently because I went and saw the Disney Snow White version, which, was exactly the sort of mistake that you'd think it would be, both to attend and to produce. And so I want to just tell you a snippet of that story. So Snow White is young and beautiful, and the evil queen wants that, right? So she's an older woman who is competing with the younger woman for the younger woman's advantages. That's the evil queen. Okay, now Snow White has to run away from the evil queen. Right, and where does she go? Well, she goes out into the forest, which is the unknown, but she goes to where the dwarfs are. Now, in the Grimm's brother fairy tale, the dwarfs don't have names, so they're kind of generic. But they keep an orderly house, and they work very hard. So the Grimm brothers dwarfs, now we don't know how old these fairy tales are, by the way. There have been some folklorists who've traced some fairy tales back like 10,000 years. They're very old. Okay, so it's wisdom speaking, you could say. So Snow White goes to what? To serve the dwarves. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that to escape the evil queen, she has to make a pact with ordinary masculinity, right? She has to serve the dwarfs. Now, why? Because they protect her from the evil queen. Now, among primates, there is a phenomenon called fertility suppression, which is where women compete, the females compete to suppress the fertility of other females. And it's a very widespread phenomenon that's well known among primatologists and biologists, and it definitely characterizes human beings. And so the evil queen in the Snow White story is suppressing the fertility of Snow White. Now, she runs away from that and takes shelter among the ordinary men, the dwarves, let's say, who are the positive side of the patriarchy, you might say it that way. When the evil queen comes back, she shows up again, right? And she offers Snow White 3 gifts. The first is a bodice that's too tight and just about strangles her. So that's exaggeration of it's a narcissistic exaggeration of sexuality as a temptation. The second is a poisoned comb, right? Same thing in slightly different guise, right? Right, she's tempting Snow White to be poisoned by the worship of her own beauty. That's a good way of thinking about it. That's what the evil queen does. The third gift is the poisoned apple. Now, of course, that harkens back to the Genesis story. Anything you incorporate is something that changes you. It's like you incorporate knowledge. And so it's poisoned knowledge. And the dwarfs can't save her from that. And that's the situation young women are in the modern world, because the evil queen feeds them poisoned knowledge. And the deep question is why? And the real skeptic would say, well, the older, jealous, childless women are doing absolutely everything they can to destroy the fertility of young women. Now, there's a corollary to that, which is, this happened to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for example. It's often the women in these brutally patriarchal societies who enforce the worst impositions on young women. Like female genital mutilation, for example, is often a practice conducted by grandmothers.
And so, about that.
Yeah, that's for sure. And so there's a brutality in this, a brutality in the, and I think you see it taken to its logical conclusion, by the way, with this trans phenomena. Because I told the bloody Senate in Canada in 2016, when they crammed through that idiot pronoun bill that was a compelled speech bill, I told them that they would produce a psychogenic epidemic among young women. Because what happens when you confuse people about something basic, like their sex, you confuse the most confused the most. And so, for example, a 1% increase in unemployment produces a 5% increase in psychiatric hospitalizations, because you put a little pressure on the people who are barely hanging in there and they're done. Well, if you take, the swath of girls or boys, but girls are more prone to psychogenic epidemics, you take the swath of them that are confused for 15 reasons and you add 6 more reasons and they're done. And so, and we can see the full horror show that's the surgical mutilation and sterilization as the ultimate exemplar of this evil queen phenomenon. It's really dark.
Let me ask you a question about it.
Yeah.
Do you think in this scenario that the evil queens are conscious of what they're doing? Or it's just...
That's a great question.
It's their own self-loathing working itself out.
Here's a way of thinking about it. Every time you make a decision, you're conscious of it. But you make a lot of micro decisions and you don't remember them, right? Like, you don't remember all the decisions you made yesterday, or certainly not a week ago. But that doesn't mean you weren't conscious when you made the decision. Okay, now if you make 1,000 little decisions in the wrong direction, you were conscious at each of those decision points. You might not be cognizant of where you've ended up. And, that's the tale of many a society's disintegration into blind totalitarianism. Look, when people fail to speak up in a state that's tilting towards totalitarianism, every time they know they should say something and they don't, they're conscious. Now, they might not be conscious of where they're going to get to if they keep that up, because that's the road to hell for sure. But they're conscious every step of the way, and so they're culpable. Now, if you're talking to someone who's made a lot of bad decisions in therapy, for example, and trying to help them identify where they where they met the devil at the crossroads and made the wrong choice, you're going to have to do a lot of reviewing. And to some degree, that's the representation of all that to consciousness, because it's become implicit. It's become part of the way that you look at the world. But it's conscious when you do it or don't do it.
Well, I mean, I would like to think that this is what I've been thinking while you've been talking, with all due respect, because I have a lot of friends who are Democrat women. But I feel like you're talking about liberal women and not just women, because the conservative women I know are just not like that. They just have a totally different set of values, and they live by them and they raise children by them. And I think we see the results of it. I don't know why, and not even necessarily your average Democrat woman, but a lot of them, but certainly leftist women. Yeah, I mean, I just feel like everything you said applies and it's obvious.
Well, here's another weird data point. So psychologists have known for a long while, that sociologists as well, that people become more conservative as they get older. So that's how the data is explained. As people age, they become more conservative. But you can take exactly that same data and you can put another twist on it. It's exactly as explanatory, and I think it's more accurate. The reason this hasn't happened is because academics, including the researchers, are radically biased in the direction of the liberals. It isn't that you become more conservative as you get older. It's that conservatism is the political expression of maturity, and liberalism, progressivism, and the hedonism that goes along with it, that self-centered hedonism that is part and parcel, let's say, of the Pride movement, that is the political expression of immaturity. And so here's something else this explains, because this is a perverse fact. There has been no economic and conceptual doctrine that's been more radically discredited than, let's say, the radical leftism, the Marxist brands of leftism. But it doesn't go away. So it's not leftism, it's not Marxism. Marxism is the most radical expression of hedonistic immaturity. And the reason it doesn't go away is because hedonistic immaturity doesn't go away. It battles with maturity. And as you become more mature, you become more conservative, because conservatives are community-oriented and not self-oriented. Now, interestingly as well, on the psychological side, there is no distinction between thinking about yourself and being unhappy. Those things are so tightly aligned that you can't dissociate them statistically. Right. So as you become more conservative, but truly more mature, the way you orient your life is toward the future and towards other people. And that turns out not exactly to make you happy, you know, and you pointed this out. You said happiness was a fraught word, and I agree, because happiness is a hedonistic goal. But secure in your identity, free from chaotic anxiety, goal-directed, purpose-driven, and in service to others, right? Well, that's not bad. That's a good substitute for happiness. In fact, if you were wise and mature, that's what you would substitute for happiness, right? That's why Pinocchio discovers nothing but slavery on Pleasure Island, by the way. So, right, because, you know, if you're a slave to your hedonic whims, that doesn't make you happy. It just makes you a slave. Right. So, okay, so...
But let me ask you, because I look at the political divide you mentioned when we kicked this off between young people, young men and young women. And it doesn't surprise me one iota that young women are liberal. But it does surprise me that young men are now becoming conservative in greater numbers than I've ever seen in my lifetime. I mean, it does and it doesn't. It doesn't, because I follow politics for a living and I've seen what the left has done to young men. So I see it's a natural gravitation. But what do you think that that's what's caused it? And if so, why aren't young women open to that? You know, we've seen some young women start to vote Trump with the Trump hats. I tend to believe, maybe I'm totally wrong, this is completely anecdotal, but I tend to believe they see these young men who are very pro-Trump with the hat, and it's kind of cool. And they like the guys wearing those hats, and they like what those guys are saying and the way they're acting. And it's a natural aphrodisiac. And so next thing you know, those women have the hat on and they're open-minded and they're hearing it discussed.
Okay. Let's delve into that a little bit. First of all, I think it's happening to young men. I think that the podcast crowd has had a fair bit to do with that. And I think the reason for that is that that's the only place that young men find encouragement.